Hello, and welcome to Sound and Image Lab, the Dolby Institute podcast. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell story, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. So long before Hamilton took the world by storm, Lin-Manuel Miranda had another show on Broadway, In the Heights. And that was a pretty extraordinary success as well. It took a total of 13 Tony Award nominations for its original Broadway production and won 4 Tonys, including the Tony Award for Best Musical. Now, of course, it is a major motion picture that's available on HBO Max and at a theater near you. It can be tricky to adapt a very successful and beloved stage musical to the screen. So in order to make that happen, the production tapped veteran music supervisor Stephen Gizicki, who worked on the incredibly successful La La Land, as well as a number of other major movie musicals. And Lin-Manuel Miranda turned to an old collaborator, his college friend and one-time roommate, Bill Sherman, to act as the music producer. And Bill has some really great stories because he was part of the In the Heights team from the very first workshops all the way through the off-Broadway show to the Broadway success and now to the movie itself. So how difficult was it to turn this particular Broadway musical into a great and successful motion picture? Let's listen to Steve and Bill talk about the process and find out how it happened.
I am Usnavi, and you probably never heard my name. Reports of my fame are greatly exaggerated.
Morning, Usnavi.
Pan caliente, café con leche.
On these blocks, you can't walk 2 steps without bumping into someone's big plan.
I'm making moves, I'm making deals, but guess what? What? You still ain't got no skills.
Bill and Steve, thank you guys for joining us to talk about In the Heights. I had a great experience watching this movie. It was my first time back on a studio lot, seeing a movie in a proper screening room in almost a year and a half. So it was an amazing treat to go back and actually see this movie on the big screen. Before we get started talking about the film, I kind of wanted to just give a little space. We have a lot of students who listen to our podcast and a lot of young professionals and aspiring professionals. So I wanted to just kind of ask you guys about your professional career path and how you got to where you are today, and sort of just the short version of your origin story, if you will. So, Bill, you want to start off?
Sure. My origin story. That makes it sound like it's such an epic major thing. It's not. Let's see. I grew up on Long Island. I was a saxophone player. I loved jazz in high school and stuff, things like that. I went to Wesleyan University to study music. There I met the now famous Lin-Manuel Miranda. We became very good friends. We worked on his musicals in college. I did not work on it In the Heights in college. I worked on the show that was after In the Heights, and then all of the subsequent ones post that. Then we graduated from college. Lin and I were roommates for about 5 years. And he was a substitute teacher at his high school, and I worked in the computer department at MTV. And on lunch breaks, we would take like 4-hour lunch breaks, and we would go to the drama bookshop and make up raps for a group that later became Freestyle Love Supreme. And we would work on In the Heights, the then musical that has now since changed and become a major motion picture. And what else happened? We worked on that. And then I sort of managed to get into television by accident. I did the Electric Company for Sesame Workshop, and then that led to being the music director of Sesame Street, where I've been for 10 years. And then we made the Hamilton business, and we made the Hamilton record. And then,
that little thing.
And here we are. And yeah, and now here we are doing In the Heights as a movie, which is like, for me, like a 20-year odyssey that began when I was 20, and I'm now 40. And so it's just a very weird sort of circle of life, a very weird circle of things that have happened to me. And I think watching this movie now is sort of like the ultimate meta life situation. Most of my 20s and 30s were dedicated to that show. And so it's very gratifying for it to come out in this form and for people to see it, and getting to work with all kinds of different people who have all different ways of bringing their talents to that show and that movie. And I don't know, here we are. Here's the present. Steve has a much more interesting career than I do. Facts.
I don't know. I don't know about anybody else, but I would really love to see the musical of Bill and Lynn in college rooming together, sort of the odd couple.
Yeah, we are. We continue this day to this day to be the odd couple, and it's yeah. We weren't roommates in college. We were roommates after college, but we were pretty inseparable for most of college, just like making musicals and being dumb and that kind of thing.
That's the title: making music and being dumb.
Your turn, Steve.
My turn. Yeah, I was born in Michigan, raised in San Diego, and I was just sort of always that kid that was listening to music at the record store and had the, it was the 80s, so I had that really great ratted out goth hair kind of thing. But I was in San Diego, so I was tan, which was probably really weird. Like this tan goth.
I like it.
Tan goth. And then I moved to LA to go to UCLA, and I just began a period of like I ran the record station there and was interning at labels and management companies and whatever. And my dream, I wanted to run my own record label. That was my dream. And I started to work at Virgin Records right out of college in the radio promotion department, and then moved into marketing as a product manager. And this is like my mid-20s, and I was having the time of my life. Like I was on tour with David Bowie and working with the Rolling Stones and Lenny Kravitz and Tina Turner and Janet Jackson. And Smashing Pumpkins. It was amazing. But any music students that are familiar with the mid 90s, late 90s, there was this thing called Napster that kind of swept in, and the industry started to fall apart. And I just the music business just kind of really wasn't my thing. The label business, it was very slow moving, very old school. Bunch of old white guys with pinky rings, and it wasn't much my jam. So I moved over to this soundtrack label, Polygram Soundtracks, and started overseeing soundtrack albums because I also had a love of film. I minored in film in college, and I could never, up until that point, I couldn't reconcile my love of film and music. Like, how do I make them work together? Unless I want to get music videos, like I didn't know music supervision was a thing, because they don't teach you that in school. And also at that point, music supervision wasn't what it is today. It wasn't as visible, I guess. So I worked at Polygram Records for a while. And then, my life sort of was also a series of record labels being bought and me being downsized and thrown out. And so then I just kind of hopped around, and I was an independent supervisor on and off after Polygram Records shut down. And then I was in-house overseeing animated musicals at Disney, all those sequels like Bambi 2 and Brother Bear 2 and Cinderella 3. I did all those. And what was great about those is I didn't realize it at the time, but those projects, at that time, we were the only people making musicals because musicals were really out of fashion. This was post Disney glory days of Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid, and pre La La Land, Greatest Showman. So there was a period in the middle where there weren't a lot of musicals being made, and I learned how to make musicals in this sort of little weird corner of Disney. And little did I know that was going to serve me well in the future as I packed up that knowledge. But after Disney, I was independent for a while, then went to Lucasfilm and was oversaw music there for a while and worked really closely with George, which is just a dream come true. Then Disney bought the company, got laid off, and I landed on this little movie called La La Land and changed my life forever. So I sort of became this go-to guy for musicals. And a few years later, I had the great fortune to work with Alex Lacamoire on Fosse Verdon. And that's how I crossed paths with Lynn and then eventually Bill. And we're now on like our third or fourth project together. We're also working on Tick, Tick, Boom. And I'm having a ball.
Like I said, way more fun than mine.
Well,
is it?
Yeah, that was pretty good.
That's
said
great.
Like David Bowie. I didn't say David Bowie.
Yeah, I mean, that's mind blowing that you got to work with all those amazing artists. So I think you kind of set up my next question, Steve, which is I'm really curious. So you guys have got this kind of group. I mean, obviously Lin-Manuel Miranda, working with Alex Lacamoire. And for those of you who listen to our podcast regularly, you might remember Alex was on our show last summer when we did an episode about the Hamilton film. So we know Alex. He's quite a force of nature as well, and a really fun person to talk to. So between Alex and Lin-Manuel and you, Bill, and you, Steve, kind of talk to us about how this team works together and who's doing what on putting together the music specifically for In the Heights.
Sure. So, you know, I think one of the best things about our team is that there's like implicit trust always at this point, and over time we've all sort of figured out how to, you know, who does what and who does it really well. But you know, Lynn and I started working together in college. We worked on In the Heights for a couple years before Alex came along. This was 2004, 3, 4, 5, something like that. When we were on our way off Broadway, Alex at that time was working on Wicked, and he came in, and then he sort of lent this authenticity to what we were doing, because at that time I certainly had no idea what I was doing, and we had no idea how to make a musical or really do anything at that point. So Alex came, and then we went off Broadway, we went to Broadway, and then Hamilton happened, and then now here we are for the film. And I think, you know, it sort of is like a trickle down situation. So Lynn's the boss. Lynn writes all the songs, and he, you know, writes all the lyrics, and he has this vision. And when we were in our early 20s, we always talked about like, what would it sound like for In the Heights if you walked from where we lived on 212th Street to his parents' house, which is like on 180 something Street. And like, what are those sounds? What do you hear? And how do we make those like as truly authentic as possible? And then, when Steve came along, Steve lent the cinematic authenticity to it too, because I think it's interesting about titles in movies versus television versus musicals. They're all different. So like a music supervisor for a musical is one thing, but in my head, music supervisor for a film is the other boss. So like for anything to happen on In the Heights, we all go to Steve. Like if we don't know what to do, he's like the den father, whatever. We don't know we sort of don't know. Like Alex and I are sort of just like floating around in this abyss, and then we're like, oh God, what needs to happen? What do we need to do? We find Steve, and Steve goes, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to do it. And this is when you need to do it by. And we're like, okay, great. That's fantastic. Sort of like just pointing us in the right direction. And then Steve's best thing is Steve very subtly gives notes that you never even knew were there. And he finds ways to slip them in ways that are very artistic and very awesome and very helpful to the film as a whole. And I love when he does it. So like we'll be on one call and I'll get a text from Steve that says, maybe you should say this. And I'll say, oh, maybe I should say that. And then I say it. I don't know if I'm giving away trade secrets, Steve, but this is what happens. It's amazing. And
so is Steve texting you right now saying like, make sure to say this?
Yes. He's saying, stop saying this right now. Oh God, sorry.
I've actually written his entire monologue here, and it's just
yeah. This on this other side of my computer is just a script that I'm reading from. Pulling the strings, Steve. And then and like I was saying before about trust is Lynn sort of hands over these things to us, you know, these melodies and these songs, and then what Alex and I have done over time is sort of figured out what the best way for us to contribute is, which is, you know, is shape and form, and like where to edit things and how to end things and how to begin them. And then just to make everything that is in Lynn's head sound as real and good and authentic as possible. And I think over time, I mean, we've been doing this for 20 years. Like I said, I think we've been able to sort of figure that out a little bit. And like he trusts us and we trust him. And so there's all this like implicit trust that sort of really helps the creative process, if you will. That sounds sort of cliche, but I think it's true. And so, you know, there's a line in the Heights book where Lynn says something effective, you know, with Alex and Bill, I tell them 3 words and they just know what to do. And I think like over time, it's maybe even shrunk to 1 word. Like it'd just be like, "Burr," and they're like, okay, cool. And like, we'll do that thing. And so, you know, we've been fairly successful at it so far. And that's sort of been the process. And that's how the 4 of us have worked together. Was that accurate, Steve?
Yeah. And I think trust is the key word, right? Because as you may have noticed, Lynn is a busy guy. And he does, you know, I've worked with a lot of directors over time and a lot of, you know, creators. And when you're entrusted with their baby, like my job is to, the key part of my job is to know what the vision of the project is and to make that happen. Right. So it's not my vision per se. My job is to sort of help the director or the writer or whoever is, realize their vision, put it on screen, put it on television, and put it on record. And most directors or creators, like I'll be communicating with them, by the minute. Like, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? Can you prove this? Can you prove this? Yada, yada, yada. But with Lin, he's so busy that it's great that he actually can just sort of lob something over the fence to us and entrust us to kind of take it almost to the finish line, without having to check in. We know instinctively when to check in, right? Without wasting his time. And he trusts us that he knows that we're going to get it to the finish line to his satisfaction. And so, and that keeps the machine moving. It keeps it frees him up to do his million other things. And, also like when we, as Bill said, like we have a really great collaborative nature between the two of us. Like, Bill and Alex are their own little perfect machine. And I just kind of dive in occasionally and send Bill, critical notes, but also I'm responsible to the director and the studio. And the studio, because of the way that this is set up and because these are Lin productions, they're a bit hands-off musically. Like, they also trust that it's all going to go okay. So it's my job to report back to the studio, and play them stuff when possible and just kind of reassure them that we are making great stuff and we are under budget and on schedule.
That's great. Well,
or over budget.
over budget for a good reason, right? Well, let me just dig into that a little. Yeah, I want to just explore that a little bit further, because I think in a non-musical movie world, in my experience, the music supervisor is usually the person who comes in and is sort of in charge of the source cues. So the music in the film that is not the score, that's the responsibility of the music supervisor. And sometimes the music supervisor will get involved with the scoring as well. But obviously with a movie musical like this, the music is a pre-existing thing. And I'm sure that there are changes from the original Broadway show, which I want to talk about as well. But sort of that kind of role of suggesting new music, existing music to the license and put in the film doesn't exist in this paradigm, right? So
it does, but to a lesser extent, right? Like, I guided, there's that Chucky 73 track that plays in the bodega when Usnavi's fixing the fridge. So, I worked on that, and Bill and Alex had nothing to do with that one, really. I found that smooth jazz "You'll Be Back" cue that plays on the hold button when Kevin calls Stanford. Very proud
that's
of that.
Your tour de, that is your tour de force, man. That is like, there's articles written about that, and that's amazing.
Yeah. So that job still exists, but on these, and in La La Land, I found, all these, weird little source cues that you hear throughout the film. But that side of the role is diminished. In a project like this, it is sort of dead mother, as Bill said, and it's really just keeping an eye on the freight train, making sure that it is that it keeps going.
Yeah. Well, and that's in contrast to, we were talking before we started recording about your work on Strange Magic, because we have Lucasfilm in common. So that was exactly the opposite, which was a musical that was entirely based on source music, right? That George Lucas produced and was directed by Gary Rydstrom. So
yeah, that just, I could write an encyclopedia on that experience. I mean, that film went through so many iterations, and we demoed a few hundred songs from the Great American Songbook and on. So that job was full on music supervision. Just George rewrites the story. I got to find new songs to tell that story, because it was a jukebox musical for those at home that haven't seen it.
Yeah, and George obviously very knowledgeable and very passionate about 50s and 60s music. So that must have been fun for you.
Yeah.
So Bill, tell us.
Yeah, if I ever wanted something a little bit.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Bill, tell us a little bit about the evolution of In the Heights, the musical, from the off-Broadway production to the Broadway production to now in the film. How has the music changed, and what's that evolution been like?
Sure. I mean, at its heart, I think a lot of the sounds of it remain the same. Lin would say that the production he wrote in college, the only thing that still remains is in Washington Heights. That's the only thing that still remains from that time. We worked on In the Heights for 8 years before it got to Broadway. So there was like a number of iterations. There was a number of different songs. The second song in the show was like 18 different things between off Broadway until we finally arrived on Broadway and all this other stuff. And then for the film, since there's a character, there's Nina's mom is not in the film. So there's a bunch of songs that she sang that are no longer in there. And then a bunch of songs that were just sort of like Act 2 songs that we cut. And then John Chu, our director, and Kiara, the screenwriter, really did an incredible job of sort of concising everything and making, it work for what John wanted visually. Like there's a song in Act 2 called Hundreds of Stories that is not in the thing. There's Inutil, which is the father's big song about feeling useless, and that's not in it at all. And then a bunch of things we did for the film are Lynn wrote a few different lyrics. We edited a bunch of things for picture and added little who's-y what's-its here and there and vamps and things like that. I think one of the coolest things that people seem to be seeing is in When the Sun Goes Down, there's sort of this big orchestral MGM grand sort of dance break that was never in the show, that we sort of used a melody from some other songs and blah, blah, blah. I think the best thing about In the Heights sonically is that this sort of like Latin hip hop thing that sort of defined what it was in 2008 is definitely what still defines it now. And I think what the other things that we did with Steve's help to get it to the screen was employing and bringing on people who we trusted, who were really, stars of their sort of musical world. So all of the hip hop stuff was sort of produced by Mike Elizondo, who was Dr. Dre's producer. One of them has worked with Dre back in the day, still does today. A lot of the Latin stuff was made by this guy named Sergio George, who's Mark Anthony's MD for a while, and blah, blah, blah. And then all of it is mixed by Greg Wells, who totally got it from the beginning, and he was fully into it. And so I feel like utilizing all of these people's like very specific talents sort of just made it even that much greater. But I think at its core, a lot of the songs, all of the songs and a lot of the horn charts and a lot of the things remain the same. And so I thought that was pretty gratifying, that like this stuff that we thought that we made up when I was like 25 is now like 15 years later, like still resonates and still kind of works, was very surreal to me. And like I said, gratifying, and people seem to like it. So I feel like we must be doing something right. I don't know. So there we are.
Yeah. And there were lyric tweaks along the way as well. As we were recording the cast, like some lyric changes were ready to go when we went in with the cast, but then other lyric changes sort of manifested themselves as we were recording, and we realized, oh, that doesn't sound very 2020 or whatever. And we saved the lottery ticket reveal for a whole other, it was a dialogue scene as opposed to it being embedded in Pacienza Fe, so that Lynn had to rewrite that. So there are little tweaks along the way that are not entirely seismic, but necessary to translate to screen.
Well, and I presume you also got the freedom to kind of reimagine the instrumentation and the recording of the music, because you're not limited by the size of the pit orchestra that you could have in the Broadway show, right? You could go a lot bigger.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the most fun parts for us, was the scope. Alex and I we always joked that it was like, this is 2.0. Like we have Beta that was off Broadway, and 1.0, which is Broadway, and now we have the Screen, which is 2.0. And so it was always like bigger, better, louder, like all the things like you said that we couldn't do in the pit. We blew them out, So more produced elements, big, like what used to be a string pad on a keyboard is now a 30-piece string section, conducted by Rob Mathis. And we just kept on going and kept on growing and making it more and more grandiose. And I think what John Chu said to us in the beginning was like, he's like, it needs to be cinematic and it needs to be big. Like it still needs to groove and be like, have that mentality to it, but it needs to soar, and to him, that's like string. He loves strings and big orchestral things. And so as much as we could put that stuff in and make it as grandiose as possible, we certainly did.
So Steve, you're the expert in, kind of taking this amazing Broadway show and getting it ready for the cinema and putting it into the movie world. I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand how musicals work in terms of recording the cast and pre-recording versus live sung on set. And tell us a little bit about the approach for the In the Heights movie. Was there a mixture of those two approaches, or how did you go about accomplishing the songs?
Yeah, well, we started a few months out from the shoot we brought all the cast in one by one, and we did, I call it music boot camp. And we bring each actor in with Bill and Kurt Crowley, who is our vocal producer and piano accompanist. And we would drill the cast on the songs to sort of assess their abilities and really just kind of train them, right? And also, they've all been living with the original Broadway cast recording, so we had to get that out of their head and find, like, we had to find Leslie Grace's version of Breathe, right? And we needed to, and you know, by the way, Anthony Ramos, like, Anthony knows what he's doing. He needed the least amount of adult supervision, so to speak. And, you know, like Corey has a very different approach to the Benny material, right, than Chris Jackson did. So it was, that early period was about finding the voices, the film versions of these characters, and then working with the actors to get there. And after we spent a couple months doing that, we moved into the recording studio and laid down pre-records for everything. Even though we knew already that certain songs like Champagne were going to be entirely live. I mean, I'm a strong believer that you always need a pre-record because you never know when something's going to go wrong on the day. And if you can't capture something live, then you're just screwed. So it's always good to have a safety net, right? So we recorded everything, so we had it. And also that actually played in our favor because the weather kept screwing with our shoot schedule. And we would sometimes, like a song that was scheduled to shoot in August would end up shooting early July just because there was a rain or something and we had to go inside. But when you're looking at recording something live on set, you sort of have to look at a couple factors, like, are you in an environment where you can actually get a credible vocal recording without interference from, you know, elevated trains and, you know, people on the street or whatever. And so then the opportunities for live recording sort of present themselves kind of organically. Like, we know that Carnaval de Barrio, for example, to get the crowd live is going to be impossible because they're all dancing and hooting and hollering and there's chaos. But Usnavi, when it breaks down to his, you know, maybe you're right, Cindy Call in the corners, like that moment, it's just Anthony, you know, and we can absolutely record that live. So most songs are a hybrid, to be honest. You know, Olga sang Pacienza y Fe full out every single take, every single shot, every single day. So there's material to pull from there. So sometimes it's just a couple words, right? But, you know, a lot of articles have pointed this out as well. Like Champagne is 100% live and mostly one shot. So it's, that is just a beautiful accomplishment by Melissa and Anthony, to be sure.
It definitely sticks out. And I appreciate your point about just being realistic about, you know, the environment and what it's going to be possible to get. I mean, you're not going to be able to do live singing on 96,000, you know, with hundreds of people in a swimming pool, right? But what does it do? What do you gain emotionally with a song like Champagne with having the actors live sing on set and capturing that performance live as opposed to a pre-record?
I always feel like with all musicals, whether it's on the stage, it's like, okay, this person's having a hard day, so they're going to sing about it because that's what we do in musicals, and they're just going to be mid-conversation and break out in song, which is ridiculous in every way, you know. And so when you do it on the screen, it is still ridiculous in every way. So I thought what was cool about what's cool about In the Heights is that John really wanted it to be as seamless as possible. So you weren't aware if someone was lip syncing, you didn't want to know it. You didn't want to feel it. You wanted it to be as real as possible. And I feel like, so doing those things live is the only way to really make that happen. And also you have to have actors who are brave enough to do it and to trust that they can pull it off. And Melissa and Anthony were super into it, particularly like you said with Champagne, because I feel like if they had done that to the pre-record, the ability to convey the emotion wouldn't be there. And Melissa specifically, if I remember correctly, was always changing stuff on set because she was someplace else emotionally. And so whatever she had pre-recorded, which was like, you know, in a vacuum, the pre-record happens in a studio and you have no sense of what's going on around you. You know how you're presenting it to a person and how you're acting it and whatever. And so then when you can actually do it and relate to the person through song and do it really like it was on stage, you definitely have more chances for conveying emotions and for it to look like a real thing as opposed to just being, you know, like a lip sync robot vibe. And that was John's thing from the way beginning. It was like, he wanted to feel the grit of Washington Heights, and he wanted it not to feel like a musical. And so it was really interesting. And I wish people could see our Pro Tools sessions for this, because it's like words and syllables from live things versus pre-records. It's just like, it's a constant jigsaw puzzle. And I think that really helps to convey the whole emotion and the whole idea. And I think is very important to the film.
And also I want to add too, like the actors are always singing live when they're on set. So we have, we're recording them just as a reference, right? So we can match lip sync later. It helps. And Melissa was so aware of her character's emotional state at any given time, because there is a difference between singing and acting singing, right? And Melissa would be singing one of the numbers, like Won't Be Long Now or whatever, and would come to us afterwards, and she's like, by the way, if it looks weird on camera, that's because I'm singing totally differently than the pre-record. Note it. I'm gonna have to go back and record it later. And we would sometimes get a note from a studio where somebody saying, "Oh, well, Melissa doesn't look like she's lip syncing accurately because it doesn't match the pre-record." And we say, "Well, that's the point, because she's acting, and now we need to go back and adjust."
So you had a fair amount of like ADR singing.
Yeah,
a fair amount.
Yeah, like she, for example, the fight in Blackout. By the way, us navigating the COVID of it all is a whole other conversation when we were in post. But we tried to do that live, the fight in Blackout in the dark alley, but it just didn't work out very well. And we actually, Melissa had to re-record that from a closet in Mexico during COVID.
Yeah,
insane.
As one does.
Yeah.
Well, so that teed up one of my questions.
I wish the studio was called the Mexican Closet, but it's not. Sorry, go ahead.
You could totally trademark that. That teed up one of my next questions, which was, how involved were you guys in post-production? It sounds like you guys didn't just, be on the set for the pre-records or for the, playing back the pre-records, and then you went off to your next film. It sounds like you were both pretty heavily involved all through the process. And how involved were you with the actual mixing of the film with Lewis and John on the dub stage?
We were with it the entire time. I think from beginning to absolute end. In fact, the day before we all went underground into quarantine, we were all together in New York. Us, John, Lewis, we were all there mixing the movie. The way we did it for this is we mixed all the songs. Greg Wells mixed all the songs in his LA studio and sent them back and forth to me and Alex. And then we mixed them in New York for a while, and then took a break for a while, and then they mixed it again in LA, right, Steve? And then Greg went to that mix while Alex and I were here, and we could sort of like go back and forth. I mean, like, thank God for technology in the COVID world we live in. We were able to sort of mix in two different coasts at two different times and sort of all sort of get it together. I had never mixed anything in Atmos or whatever, Dolby, like all that stuff, and it was one of the coolest, most surreal parts of my life. I mean, I live in a stereo world, and so like when things are moving around and there's a tambourine over here and all of that stuff, it was super cool. And it was very overwhelming at times just to be like, because, for my whole life in the Heights, I sort of just lived like this. And so now it was like sort of living like this, which is sort of what you wanted for a movie like that, right? It's like you want it to be all encompassing. And so the fact that we could do that sonically as well was super cool and super, enthralling. I don't know what the right adjectives are, but you know what I'm saying? And awesome. And so, yeah, to answer your actual question is, I don't think we'd ever leave In the Heights. We were with it from beginning to end at all times because, like Lynn's best line about this kind of stuff is like when you make something you're so close to you, it's like your baby. And so then eventually you have to give your baby off to people and let them have it. And so we tried to not give the baby away for as long as possible until we really felt like we nailed it. And then finally we gave it away. Terrifying.
I was going to say the extra time of COVID actually ended up helping us because we were getting ready to deliver the final film April or so of last year. And we got it to a point where we thought we'd be ready to go to the dub stage remotely. And then we realized, dubbing this film remotely is just a great idea, and the release date got pushed anyway, so we had some extra time. But that time gave us the opportunity to look under the hood a little more. We remixed some of the songs. We spent time, like Myron, our editor, spent more time with John and cut the film a little bit differently in some spots. And it helped us sonically, because there was a constant ebb and flow of exploration of how much environment is in these songs, what leads the environment of the music. And we would do some passes where, it's way too many footsteps of the dancers and handcuffs. And then there'd be another pass, it's not enough. It doesn't feel alive in the space. So that extra time gave us breathing room to find the balance, because it was tricky. It didn't sort of manifest itself until right near the finish line, to be honest.
Well, Bill, I'm gonna express my gratitude to you for bringing up Dolby Atmos, because I would like to ask you a couple of questions about that. It is the Dolby Institute podcast, so I would be remiss if I didn't.
I know.
So, and I got to say, like, the experience of hearing the songs in Dolby Atmos is really spectacular, and happily, that's something that is now pretty easy because of Apple Music and obviously the film is streaming on HBO Max and Dolby Atmos, so a lot of people are going to get to have that experience. But you mentioned this was your first time working in Atmos, and how did you learn about it, and kind of what excited you about having that tool at your disposal?
The short answer is I had no idea what it was. And and everybody, they said, you have to go to this mix. It's in Dolby Atmos. And the biggest fan in our group of Dolby Atmos is Greg Wells, because he lives in that world and he knows all about it. And he was so psyched to get to do this in Dolby Atmos. So I went to the dub stage, which is the thing, and then we would do mixes of the soundtrack in like Dolby's room in New York. So and then also we did it for Hamilton as well, and it was just sort of taking things, like I said, that live in this stereo world and giving it another dimension. And that to me was just, I mean, it's sort of like in your head, it's how you always want to hear things, and you never had the chance to, and now you can, and it's surreal. And you know what I think about is like when we went to surround, like when we went up to 5.1, blah blah, and now like when you make something, the fact that you can think about hearing it in this sort of way, to me, makes you create it differently, and then like you can push the boundaries so much further. And I just think that that's so freaking cool because like it's not just coming like right at your face. I mean, okay, so here's a great story. When we did In the Heights on Broadway, there was this one row in the theater that we called the Face Melter row, which was like row J or something, where every speaker would hit you, and so every show, every time In the Heights went up, someone from row J would no doubtedly go to the front of house people and be like, it's so freaking loud, I can't hear myself think. And we'd be like, where are you sitting? And they'd be like, row J. And we'd be like, well, that's the Face Melter row. That's the word sounds the best row, right? And so now to think that like not only is there now like the Face Melter row is everywhere to me, like, you know, you always try to find the hot spots of theaters and things, but now like you can be sitting with your AirPod or whatever the heck and just be like in a park and like you're in the Face Melter row, to me is so amazing. I think that's unbelievable. And then whoever was working with us at Dolby was explaining like even with like, you know, earbuds and whatever, like you could still experience things like this. To me, I mean, that technology is unbelievable. And I think it will, if people like really like understand it and realize how much it allows people like us to push the music, they're going to want it like that all the time. And I can't believe they wouldn't. I feel like that it's such a cool, awesome technology. And again, just the way I would want to hear things. I've been wanting to hear things forever, and now we, you know, get that opportunity.
I know, going back to our conversation earlier that we had before the interview, Skywalker Sound, when I was up at Lucasfilm, I had the early days of Atmos, I had a demo in the theater of Skywalker Sound, which is the best sounding theater in the entire world, essentially. And STAG?
At the STAG Theater, yeah.
And I think it was that Tom Cruise movie, Oblivion.
We use that as Dolby Atmos demo material for many years because it's such a spectacular Dolby Atmos mix. Yeah,
it blew my mind, right? And then from that point forward, like Strange Magic, this Lucasfilm title we talked about, was the first musical to go through the Atmos system. And it was so interesting because we had all these tools at our disposal. Like, wow. And we just had so much fun just moving, music and instruments and voices and just creating an environment. And, Gary Wrightstone was directing and mixing, and he's just a genius, right? And it's such a fun, spectacular, exciting tool to use in the music space,
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that. I think, one of the things that really kind of surprised us when we introduced Atmos was it was actually the music departments on the films that often embraced the tool much faster than the sound design and sound effects departments, because it just gave you such opportunities, first of all, to pull off of the screen and use the entire space, but also to place instrumentation all around you in a way that just made you feel like you were much more a part of the music. So I guess just one last question about this before we move on. Any favorite moments for Dolby Atmos in the soundtrack as you're listening to it that you might point people to? Any specific songs that you think are really fantastic in the format?
Carnaval de Barrio, I think, is really just like you feel like you're standing right in the middle of that party, and I think that's couldn't be cooler. Same thing with 96,000. Definitely, you feel like you're in the pool, which is super cool. And then I think what my favorite thing about Atmos, now that I've been thinking about it, is background vocals. So you have more space to put things. So when you used to like cover up, or background vocals used to be in essence background, with stuff like within the Heights, like the background vocals are the community, they are this presence, and they have to have presence, and so they can't just be put in the back. So like even in the opening song, in the Heights, blah 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 blah, like that can't be something that feels distant. It has to be like right in your face, and we were able to do it so well, Greg, really with Atmos, because you have space to put the other things, right? And so then you can have the background vocals like really like be in your face. I thought that to me was so cool, so great, definitely great moments.
96,000 is the one that jumps out to me the most, because the opening of the song when they're looking at the lottery tickets, yo, how much is it? And he's like 96,000. You hear bing, 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 and it feels like a thought. It feels like a memory, right? It's I don't know how to put it, but it doesn't feel like it's on the screen. It feels like it's in your head. It's the best way that I can describe it, I guess. And then the shot where Sonny opens the doors and enters into the pool. And the crowd, and there's a what, and boop, 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 and there's a siren going on. Like you feel suddenly just sucked into the world of that pool, of that community. And it just sort of wraps its arms around you and pulls you in. And it gets me every time.
That's amazing. That's great.
And Bill had a lot of fun. I said that more way. That's a lot of Bill special sauce.
Yeah, we had some sauce.
So I want to ask you about working with your director, Jon Chu. Bill, you mentioned that he didn't want the movie to seem too much like a musical, but at the same time, the way he's designed it and shot it for the screen, there's so many fantastical elements in it. And I'm thinking specifically about, the wonderful number When the Sun Goes Down and dancing on the side of the building. And so tell us a little bit about the process of working with Jon Chu and kind of how he encouraged you to rethink about the songs and putting them together for a film as opposed to the stage. I
feel like what was interesting is, so, Alex and me and Lynn and, we've been with this project and Kiara have been with this project forever. And so initially Jon was very apprehensive about changing things and bringing his ideas to the thing. So there was like this 2 or 3 week, I can't remember how long it was, like sort of grace period where we were getting to know him and he was getting to know us. And he was so sensitive to hurting our feelings about cutting things or reimagining things or doing things. But we were like, no, dude, this is your film. This is what we're supposed to be doing. And this took a while. And then he started trusting us and we started trusting him. And, the story now is like we send pictures of our kids to each other and like we couldn't be closer, right? But my favorite thing about Jon is he's super musical, having done the Step Up films and all this other stuff. He gets music, and he has such a vision. Like I've never seen a guy with such a vision. Like he's like, it's going to be this, it's going to look like this. Then he'd show up the next day with like a fully rendered animation of what we're supposed to be looking at, and we were all just like, what is happening? Like, what is happening? And so it was that was a crazy experience. And then, you know, he knew what was going to happen 10 steps ahead of us. So when we'd be in the studio recording something, be like, well, she's going to be looking like this, so she'd probably say it like this. And I was like, how do you know that? And he's like, because I have it all in my head. Like, I know what it's going to be. Da, da. And that to me was so impressive. And then when it got into post, he had, you know, found underscoring we had used in the show, on the Broadway show, and sort of found these very artful ways to repurpose it for the film, which was so smart and so cool. And so, you know, all of those musical moments sort of still remain as this whole experience that we initially created for Broadway. They sort of permeate themselves throughout the movie, which was very smart and very awesome. And then our sort of 2.0 vision that I was talking about before definitely was with him. Like, it's just like, it's got to be bigger. It's got to be like, you know, the fact that like there's 1,000 people dancing in circles in a pool and splashing and doing all this stuff. It's just like, you know, it's unbelievable. And that was he showed us pictures of old school, like synchronized swimming things. And we were like, what? He's like, trust me. We were like, okay. And then, you know, it was like, and then what's interesting about that is it became like a challenge. Like, how could we step up, no pun intended, up to his level of visual stuff, like with sonically, because it was so far out. And so I feel like we were constantly like one-upping each other in a way. And I thought that was a heck of a way to do such a magnificently large film, was always trying to outdo each other. And I feel like finally, when we did get to the end, like the visual and the sonic sort of thing all came together, worked. And that was a pretty major achievement, I thought.
Yeah. And Bill, you know, hit the nail on the head too. We said John just has a vision and he's very prepared. He knows what he wants and he sees way down the road. When I first arrived in New York, I went to the production office, and Bill, I think you might have been with me. John sat us down and had storyboarded most of the musical sequences. This is early days, by the way. And you know, at that time, all he had to work with was the original Broadway cast recording. But he showed them to us, and they were so fantastical, right? They're dancing on the side of a building. There are mannequin heads twisting and turning in Nome Diga. And that, to me, that was the pivotal moment of this production, because I saw into his head at that moment. And there's a moment in Nome Diga when there's the nails clicking on the table, and Bill and I go, okay, we get this. We are now understanding how this translates. Not only how this translates from stage to screen, but what John's version of that is. And even in those rough animatics, he had sort of, you know, played with the music a bit to make it sound closer to what he wanted it to sound, and to cut the songs a little bit. And it was such a clear directive. Like, this is my version of the movie, and we're like, okay, we got it. Now we're gonna go off and make it.
That's great. It makes me want to ask you about Paciência e Fé, which is such a spectacular number and so cinematic in terms of the way that it's playing with time and space, and she's moving back and forth in era from, you know, first arriving in New York, and it's such a beautiful number. Can you talk a little bit about the process of putting that together and kind of reimagining it for the screen? What
people don't know about Paciência e Fé is initially when Lin wrote it in 2003, 2004, it was like 80 pages long, and it told this woman's entire life story, like for every year. And we were just like, it was like, you know, you taped it together and you unfolded it, and it was like this giant accordion. And so like our job initially was to edit it down and to find the most concise story that we could tell with that wasn't like 30 minutes long. And so and so then when it transferred to the film, a lot of it is very much exactly the same. Abuela's journey has always been kind of similar from the, except for when she passes away. but it worked for this because that song was so, at its core, was so simple. It was just like this Cuban rumba son thing that just sort of told this story. And it was, I think what led to its cinematographic achievement was the way that Lin wrote it. I just feel like it's so clear and it's so well written, and it's so, you know, you can see it's also very visual. You can see Mayor LaGuardia, and you can see people struggling in the cold. You can see all those things. And then And then it just sort of, those pictures are just what Jon Chu took and just like made more vibrant and more crazy. And also where they shot it and all the dancers and all the stuff that are involved in that were just so cool. I think that's one of the most visually stunning parts of the whole film. You just like can't believe your eyes. And then when the pole is a light and then it goes back to a pole and all that stuff is just like, it was a very surreal moment. I'm trying to think of like what major changes. I mean, the way it starts is a little different. The way it ends is a little different. I think we cut out a verse or something, but that song is very similar to how it existed on Broadway for sure.
You know, Olga had this has been the song of Olga's life, right? I mean, she's just singing this for a decade. And she had to work as well to find the film version of this song in her voice, right? So in the studio, you know, Bill can speak to this, I think, more wise in a smarter way than I can. But she initially started, you know, singing it just as she would on stage, right? And here it became cameras right in her face, right? So it's a more intimate telling of this story. So it's about pulling back, finding the nuances, finding the arc of the vocal, and reimagining this character for film and for now. And she's such a pleasure. She's such a pro, and was just really game to just roll up her sleeves and kind of redefine this woman that she's been living as for so long. And that was just really exciting.
Yeah. And she actually, when she came in to record the vocal, she had the original off-Broadway sheet music with her notes like written all over it. It was a very cool moment. Yeah, she's amazing. I don't really know that there are words to describe her. She's unbelievable.
And there's two different Olgas. Like there's Olga when she arrives on set and she's, you know, bouncy and fun and great. And then she goes through the makeup trailer and comes out.
She comes out. She comes out as Abuela.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anything you want the audience to know about the process of bringing In the Heights to the screen that we haven't already touched on?
Go see it. It's fantastic. And I'm not just saying that because we worked on it. It's a really good film, and and it's worth, you know, to discuss the Dolby Atmos of it all. It is super worth it to go see In the Heights in a theater to really experience the fullness of it, for lack of a better term. It's just like to really experience that movie, the brass and the people and the sweat and the thing and blah, blah, blah. It's really worth it to go and see it where we made it. So yeah, go see it in the theaters.
And I think too, you know, we sort of get into our heads like, oh, we're making this musical and it's about Washington Heights. Like, you know, my parents are just, you know, Rancho Santa Fe, San Diego, and I took them to see it last week, and it's such a movie for everyone because it's about family and home and community. And my dad, like, he's sitting next to me, he's laughing at all the jokes that I had sort of took me forever to figure out, and you know, and it translated so well to him, and it just reminded him of all those old musicals that he grew up on. You know, and he was like, "Oh, it was great to not have a movie about car chases and, you know, and guns." So it really translated to my entire family as well. So that made me really proud.
Well, Bill, thank you for that message. Yes, absolutely. Go see this movie in a theater. It's a spectacular experience. Bill and Steve, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to us about your process for bringing this amazing musical to the screen and walking us through it. It was a great pleasure to talk to you today.
Absolutely. Thank you, man.
Good to see you.
Once again, I'd like to thank Stephen Gazicki and Bill Sherman for talking to us today. If you hurry, you can still stream In the Heights on HBO Max until July 11th, or see it in your local Dolby Cinema. It is pretty spectacular in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, as Bill Sherman can attest. If you haven't already, please make sure you're subscribed to us, the Dolby Institute podcast. We have a ton of exciting episodes coming up in the next few weeks that you won't want to miss. You can find links to our dedicated podcast feed in the show notes or by searching for Dolby, wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please consider leaving us a rating or a review on the Apple Podcasts app. It really helps raise awareness of the podcast so that we can continue to grow. Until then, thank you again for joining us. This has been the Sound and Image Lab, brought to you by the Dolby Institute. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry. Production support is by Taylor Hines. And our production coordinator is Tristan Enriquez. Thank you for listening.